Hello everyone, I'm Santiago, and today I'm gonna be testing Destiny 2, the full game, on the GeForce GTX 1060, 6GB for FPS monitoring. This time I won't be using cam, since this game doesn't allow any overlays, and if you enjoy the content and want to support the channel directly, there are Humble and Amazon affiliate links down in the description. So Destiny 2, the full game, I'll be doing 1080p, 1440p and 4K. To skip none of those sections of the video, check the description below. So first I'll show you 1080p with the G4560, and you'll see that it's pretty much over 50 frames per second. Most of the time it's over 60, but you'll see sometimes when I'm looking into certain points where there is more detail into the distance that there will be drops below 60 frames per second. In this case, this seems to be happening due to the CPU. I checked the task manager after I played and I saw the CPU usage around 90 to 100% and the GPU usage around 70 to 90%, so there were some drops due to the CPU. Due to that, I decided to use the Ryzen 3 1200 across the rest of the video. Since I have some better frame rates, it wasn't a huge difference, but it was enough to stay over 60 frames per second more often. There were still some drops below 60, but there were less often on the G4560. So yeah, on the G4560 it's still a totally playable experience, so don't worry if you have that CPU, it runs fine. So yeah, on 1080p I use max settings except in depth of field, which I lowered from the highest to high, which in my opinion doesn't make much of a difference visually, but on the frame rate it can make a difference. Then at 1440p I had to lower everything to pretty much medium settings in order to target 60 frames per second or close to that target, and the game stayed pretty stable at that resolution as well. Then I crank up the settings to the max at 1440p to find that I'm over 30 frames per second all the time, and finally at 4K I overclocked the GTX 1060. You can see core memory clocks down in the description. I basically added 225 MHz to the core and 400 MHz to the VRAM, and that was enough to play at low settings over 45 frames per second. And if you don't care about the frame rate and want better visuals, just do high settings, which I tested at the end of the video. It's just 4K, high settings, and the game is over 30 frames per second with the overclock 1060. So yeah, many options here to pick from. In all my Destiny 2 videos on the final game, I used the latest NVIDIA drivers, which are the Game Ready drivers, version 388. So keep that in mind. And well, for the testing methodology, I just decided to run into one of the main areas, which is a big area compared with most of the places on the beta. So we get more CPU usage. Unfortunately, I cannot show you CPU, GPU and RAM usage since this game is blocking overlays, so I cannot use MSI Afterburner, CAM's overlay doesn't work either. This game is just blocking code injection, so you cannot really see that in an overlay in this game. So when I was testing the game, I just Alt-Tab out of the game, look at the CPU and GPU usage, and so far for what I could see on the G4560 on these open areas that I tested, there was some drops in the GPU usage on all the cards, excepting on the 750 Ti for example. So if we're targeting 60 frames per second, the G4560 seems to be close to that target. It sometimes drops to 50 frames per second due to the CPU. It's usually when you look far into the distance, not really a long period of time. So I think that it's still good enough to use the G4560 on this game. Then on the Ryzen 3 1200 with the 3.9 GHz overclock, it happened less often, so we had a better average frame rate. So yeah, if you have a modern i5 and i7, something like that, maybe a Ryzen 5 1600 overclocked, it should be enough to be over 60 frames per second without a problem. Then in the options menu, I used, well, what you see on screen, 105 degrees FOV. On the anti-aliasing option, we don't have MSAA anymore. Bungie said that it wasn't working well with the game, with the way they render the game, so they decided to remove MSAA. So we have FXAA and SMAA. Then the rest of the options is pretty much the same as the beta. So I'll just tell you the ones that I lowered in order to get the best performance. Screen space, ambient occlusion, give me a decent boost in performance. Anti-aliasing from SMAA to FXAA is like 3 or 5 frames. Then depth of field, I recommend lowering this. It's a hit to the frame rate as well, quite noticeable. Shadows obviously are also a hit to performance, so I recommend keeping that on medium or high. It's usually the best balance performance quality. And then we have the draw distance. We have environment, character, foliage detail and foliage shadows distances. So those 4 options control different draw distances. The main one that helped me to get the best performance by lowering it was environment detail and foliage shadows distance. The other ones also gave me a boost by lowering them, but it wasn't as big of a boost compared to environment and foliage shadows. But yeah, overall it runs pretty good even on budget hardware. So yeah, thank you so much for watching guys, and see you next time.
There they go again. That's a pretty pile of glimmer. Hold them off while I transfer it.
Already amped. That was fast.
Hang on a minute. I just spotted quite a few fallen headed your way. Keep your guard up. Eliminating that captain under the church must have drawn the rest of the fallen out.
They won't stop coming. We need to make sure that signal is strong. You better hurry up and place that second node.
Ugh.